Hello, students. This is week 6. We are continuing the focus on client worldview. Today's chapters, or this week's chapters, are chapter 9 and 10, which are clients of European American descent and clients of multiracial descent. And so let me get this up on screen. All right. So we're going to start off with chapter 9 on culturally responsive counseling for clients of European descent. Overview of the chapter, definition of terms. So European American, people whose ethnicity and identity connect to Europe. Caucasian is an outdated and imprecise term, but continues to be used to talk about people from parts of Europe, North Africa, and Asia. White is a racial term created in contrast to people of color, so particularly Black people during the period of slavery. And so, white can kind of talk about really, a large number of individuals based on the color of their skin, not necessarily their ethnic background. POC or Black, Indigenous, POC, BIPOC are people who do not racially identify as white. Importantly, not all non-white individuals or racial groups identify with those terms. So kind of individual based on the person. And then the last definition, white supremacy, the racist belief that assumes and upholds that white people are superior to other races. And so those are important terms to know as we go through this chapter. So we're going to start off with Janet Helm's white racial identity development model. And this is a pretty well-known identity development model, but it does focus specifically on white folks. It's intended to help understand the level of racial complexity. And so processes in the model are internalization of racism. And again, the statuses are contact, disintegration, and reintegration, depending on where a person might be. And then the evolution of non-racist white identity, pseudo-independence, autonomy, and immersion. And so you can read about those specifically in the text. And there's a lot of information out there on Helm's identity development model. So you can take a look at it if you'd like to. Some other racial identity development models have used this to kind of like adapt it and change it and things like that for other ethnicities or purposes and things. Tenets of white allyship. So what does this actually look like? Increased self-awareness and self-exploration, constantly going through that process, the pursuit of knowledge and understanding about systems of power and racial injustice, the promotion of equity, and I think it's really important to stress that it's equity and not equality, because not all people need the same things. And so equity is the idea that everybody gets what it is that they need. And then the coalition building with BIPOC individuals or groups. Identity development for clients of European American descent. There's variable relationships and narratives around socio-political movements. It also depends on the connectedness to their European heritage, culture, and recency of immigration. And so using myself as an example, my mom is second generation American, but when they came to America, they were from Hungary, but they spoke German and spoke with a German accent, and it was during the time of like a lot of dissent with Germany, and so the family really didn't talk about their history, didn't talk about their background, tried to minimize their accent as much as possible. And the my mom's mom and that generation, the ones who were born later, specifically those that were born in the United States, were not even taught to speak German. They sort of almost wanted to erase it. And so even though my mom is only second generation and I'm third, we've really lost a lot of that connection to our Hungarian roots. And so other folks might have a stronger connection because of maybe more recent immigration, or those cultures and traditions were really passed down from generation to generation. And so there's a role of socialization in the development as well, and some values associated with whiteness. Some examples are individualization, so not really a collectivist culture, logic, rationality over emotion, right? We don't act on our emotions. We try to think of what's logic and rational. Centrality of efficiency, and a history viewed from the perspective of white Americans. And so we see that perpetuated in American culture is this Eurocentric, white kind of focused values and beliefs being put out there. And so counseling utilization and help seeking of this group is that white people are the most likely group to seek services over other racial groups. And the individuals within this group that are more likely to seek services are women, young adults, and middle-aged individuals. There's still definitely an age and generation gap there. Some of the most common diagnoses are related to depression and anxiety, and there is also substance abuse that can be relevant as well. So one of the things that can be really important in working with these individuals is to explore heterogeneity as well as intersectionality within the group. And so what are some of their other identities and those intersections that impact their experience? How might they be similar to some of these like stereotypes and norms and not? Looking at the multicultural and social justice counseling competencies, it's important to increase our self-awareness, pay attention to the client worldview, the counseling relationship, and any counseling and advocacy interventions that we may choose to utilize. And then again, cultural humility. And one of the things I always stress is that obviously if you're of a different background, ethnicity, race, and you're not white or you don't identify as white, there may be some assumptions about this other group. But also when we are similar to our clients in certain ways, it's also really important to practice cultural humility in that we don't want to assume that this other person's experiences are the same as ours just because we have some similarities or maybe even multiple similarities. Crafting an advocacy agenda is change for an individual is reliant on the social structures from which the client participates. And so really take a look at the systems in which they're in and how that impacts their work in counseling and growth. Take an intersectional approach as we discussed and base advocacy on the client's specific needs and what resources might be available to them. With children, adolescents, and young adults, we can look at the ecological model from Grafenbrenner. Children and adolescents are a product of intersecting systems that impact the development of the child, and then also looking at like Piaget's developmental model, that it is crucial for us to understand what stage they may be in, sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, or formal operational, for example. Some challenges can be related to divorced parents, eating disorders, fat phobia and weight stigma, learning disabilities, depression, experiences with death and grief, as well as social media and technology use. And I think that some of these are present in multiple populations. These are just ones that tend to be pretty prevalent in young people in this group. With adults, couples, and families, the book talks about Schlossberg's transition model, acculturation, broaching, toxic masculinity, which again, I think these things can cross and be issues in different groups and things like that as well. Ageism and substance abuse dual diagnosis concerns. Some implications are the importance of identity exploration, despite some clients not feeling like they have a culture because it's kind of like, you know, a fish in water. You talk about what water is, they're like, what are you talking about water, right? This is just what's always around them. And so individuals that are white or identify as white may not recognize that they have a culture because it's so omnipresent around them in America. The importance of developing allyship, not only with our clients, but also helping them to understand that there could be an importance, and again, not pushing our agenda onto them if that's not really what they're in counseling for, but having an awareness of that. being aware of the racial identity development models and the MSJCC and how that informs our practice, and then exploring biases and prior expectations with this group is really essential for ethical practice. And so that ends the slide for this chapter. We're going to take a look at the second chapter for this week, chapter 9 or chapter 10 rather, which is with multiracial clients of multiracial descent. All right, so chapter 10. And we have the objectives and the introduction to the chapter, understanding that race is a social construct. It's something that we as humans have created. Understanding that there is a lot of history that and ways in which white supremacy has impacted multiracial identity. The chapter gets into what does it mean to be multiracial, and how do individuals kind of identify that way. It talks about the different demographics of multiracial people within the United States, and brings up the question of how do you discuss racial identity with your clients, which touches on the topics of, that we keep coming back to. How do we broach the topic? How does it impact what they're coming into counseling for, etc. So competencies related to this this population specifically. And so there's the multiracial ethnic counseling concerns interest network within ACA that works to help counselors to understand this population specifically and our work with them. It's important to understand intersectionality, obviously in general, but specifically when there are multi-racial individuals, they're going to have the intersections of their ethnicity or race in addition to any other intersections. We want to explore human growth and development related to their heritage, awareness of diversity amongst the individual themselves and within their support group. How it impacts the helping relationships, how it impacts in their working groups, career development, assessments, research, program evaluation, and obviously the orientation and ethical practice with which we work with them. So some multiracial identity development models are these stage models. Poston has 5-stage model, and Kerwin and Ponterado model. And so the book kind of talks about these two in a little bit more detail, and the sort of stages that they say that individuals will go through. There's also the ecological models, which are Roots and Rockwaymore and Brunsuma's identity models, and these each have 4 stages as opposed to the first 2 that have 5 each. Stressors and discrimination. A lot of times individuals that have multiracial, multicultural, multi-ethnic backgrounds will feel discrimination sort of from both or all of the groups that they may be a part of. You're not white enough, you're not Black enough, you're not brown enough, you're not whatever, and kind of feel like they don't necessarily have a place to fit in. And then obviously, in connection with that, they will experience racial microaggressions, both from groups that they don't identify with, but also from their own groups as well. There can be this pressure to choose, right? Like choose a side, pick a group, right? You can't kind of hang out in the middle. A feeling that they are other and don't belong anywhere, as I said. And in some cases, their actual identities are unknown. They recognize that they are multiracial or multi-ethnic, but they don't always know all of the different pieces that make up who they are. And that can be a challenge as well. So utilization of help and counseling is that there is a growing multiracial population in the United States, but there's limited research regarding these populations. Racial discrimination may ultimately help or impact help seeking, and multiracial clients may or may not seek counseling to address their mixed heritage and effects of that. And so they may come in for other issues and that may be just one of the things that is present. So some of the things that we're going to kind of play on repeat is the practicing cultural humility, consider our own beliefs about multiracial populations and how they, can get in the way or impact our work. Review multicultural and social justice competencies, explore our own assumptions and beliefs, and encourage clients to advocate for themselves. So, obviously we want to be engaged in advocacy work, but we don't want to do all of the work for our clients. Helping them to advocate for themselves is very beneficial. So crafting an advocacy agenda, decide what it means to us, lean into our strengths and ways that we can help and support, rely on our passions and expertise, determine what specifically we're going to focus on with multiracial clients, and remember that they're not a monolith, that there's individual differences with each person that may identify in this way. Counseling multiracial populations, children, adolescents, young adults, and adults. And so they've kind of broken this out into specific things that may impact each of these groups or things that we can utilize. And so like strength-based approach and narrative therapy, bibliotherapy with children, adolescents, creating a space so that they have room to express themselves and kind of play out various scenarios. Young adults, having a peer group that they can connect to, or interest groups, journaling, meaning making, and then with adults, we can go into maybe some eco maps, genograms, using the cultural continuum. With couples and families, couples, potential obstacles they may face, using genograms, card sorts, identifying strengths. With families, having dialogue about the racial identities, race, ethnicity, and discrimination, exploring the family dynamics, because, within a family, perhaps only the children are multiracial and not necessarily the adults. And so that can create challenges, or there may be different multiracial identities within the family. And so media, books, websites, and so forth can be helpful for educating families. And then finally, some considerations and implications for clinical practice, incorporating culturally sensitive resources and interventions, utilizing intersectionality as a framework in holistic care, incorporating liberation framework, focusing on healing rather than just coping, and consider approaches that are less traditional in nature. And so that is it for 9 and 10. And for week 6, please let me know if you have any questions about these topics, these chapters, and you will see me again next week for week 7.